The best way to learn a language? Immersion, living where the language is spoken and using it every day. But if that's not in the cards for you this year, you can still learn a language the second best way, and that's with Babbel. Be a better you in 2024 with Babbel, the science-backed language learning app that actually works. Don't pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Babbel's tips and tools are approachable, accessible, rooted in real-life situations, and delivered with conversation-based teaching so you're ready to practice what you've learned in the real world. For instance, I've been using Babbel's convenient courses to help me learn basic conversational skills in German while I'm getting ready for a little trip I'm planning. It's not a language I'd ever studied before, but I find the lessons really easy and kind of like hand-holding me through learning a completely new language to me. And it's reassuring to know that with the help of Babbel, I'll be able to greet people, order food, and ask for directions without having to consult language apps while I'm in Deutschland. I'm still learning. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold. Plus, all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/vulgar. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/vulgar, spelled BABBEL.com/vulgar. Rules and restrictions may apply.
With your long-forgotten name, we call upon you.
We call upon you.
In the words of the unspeakable language, we call upon you.
We call upon you.
By the spilt blood of the wicked, who walk upon this world, sprouting the words of false idols, we call upon you.
We call upon you.
On the land of the dead harvest, that which brings the earth itself into your service, Yamal, we call upon you.
We call upon you. We call upon you. We call upon you.
Yamal calls upon you.
The Sprouting, a Call of Cthulhu actual play podcast by Blighthouse Studio. Find us on your podcatcher of choice.
Hello and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. My name is Anne Foster, and today we're going to be revisiting one of our classic episodes. In fact, this is the first ever episode of Vulgar History. It's where it all began. And from what I can see when I look at the statistics, this is still the most listened to episode. And I think it's because people find the podcast. Maybe they listen to one of the newer ones, or maybe they want to start at the beginning. But anyway, everybody, all of you, it seems like are completionists, and I respect that. And so you want to go back and listen to Caroline of Brunswick. And I especially appreciate that you listen to that episode and move on to listen to more episodes of the podcast, because that was very much, I think you get the vibe of what the show is and what it became. I think it's pretty strong there from the beginning, but also that's like, I was still figuring out how to use a microphone and how anything worked. So anyway, but the main thing that I wanted to do is to revisit this story and to bring new context with new facts that I've since learned about Caroline of Brunswick. I think you all know, if I was going to redo the episode entirely based on how thorough I have become, based on my inability to cast aside any anecdotes, this will probably be like a 5-part series. So like the episode itself is still as it is. And I'm going to air that coming up next. And then after that, stay tuned, because I'm going to be revisiting the story just with my future reflections about it with Lana Wood Johnson, who is, you'll hear in this kind of like afterwards, her influence on this episode and this podcast and why I chose this to be the first episode of Vulgar History. But most importantly, she was the first ever episode, and so I didn't know how to compare her against anybody else. When you're looking at the Scandiliciousness scale, I was just choosing numbers. I wanted to have somewhere to grow, but I didn't realize I was starting with such a scandalicious superstar. So the numbers are not where she would fit if I did the episode today. So stay tuned. After this after the original classic Caroline of Brunswick episode. I'm going to be revisiting her story with Lana, talking about it, and including giving her a new score on the Scandiliciousness scale. Justice for Caroline of Brunswick, moving her up from the 20 that I originally gave her into a neighborhood where I think she fits in a bit better. Yeah, so that's what you're going to hear. First of all, it's going to be the original Caroline of Brunswick episode, newly edited. Christina, our editor, did the best she could with my original recording, so the audio is cleaned up a bit. There's going to be less lip smacking sounds and things like that. And then stay tuned after that original episode for the continued discussion with Lana, including a rescoring for Caroline of Brunswick. Hello and welcome to the Vulgar History podcast. This is Season 1, Episode 1. My name is Anne Foster, and this is a feminist women's history comedy podcast where I'm just going to share some stories with you about women whose stories are not super well known, or even if you've heard of them, you might not know all the details about what they got up to exactly. It's a sort of history podcast where I just have these stories that I've run into, that I read about, that I feel like are really interesting, and that I just really want to share them with lots of people. And I've already shared them with all the people who I know in life. So I figured, why not start a podcast so even more people can learn all these bonkers, scandalicious stories of all these amazing women. And when I was thinking about, making a little theme for my first season, what I fell upon, thanks to especially one of my Twitter mutuals, and I'm sorry I didn't write down what your name was, but one of my wonderful Twitter mutuals suggested well-behaved women seldom make history podcasts. So sort of inspired by the famous quote from Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, who was a historian who was writing about Puritan burial rituals, like funerals in oldie Puritan times in America. And just casually in the middle of one of the paragraphs, this historian Laurel Thatcher Ulrich just mentioned well-behaved women seldom make history. She was saying it in the middle of a bunch of other sentences. And she was basically saying, she's looking at these records and there's not a lot written about women because back in the day, and it's not super different now in a lot of places in the world, a woman was seen as being most successful if she just sort of stayed out of the limelight, stayed potentially inside the house, raising the children, not bringing any attention to herself. So what Laurel Thatcher Ulrich is saying by this quote, well-behaved women seldom make history, she's not saying so get out there and misbehave, women. She's just saying we don't know a lot about a lot of women from the last several centuries, millennium of patriarchal Western culture. And that's because the culture was designed to not know about them. So the women who we do know about are the women who didn't, quote unquote, behave themselves. And that's who we're going to be looking at this season. Just women who made a spectacle of themselves in various ways, who just sort of weren't just status quo. And we know about them because of how they were different from other people. And we're going to look at one of my most favorite women from history. And I've only just learned about her in the last year or so through a convoluted series of just, when you read about something and then that makes you read about something else, and then you're just in this deep rabbit hole and you start learning about all these amazing facts. The woman who we're looking at today, for our first episode, is a woman named Caroline of Brunswick. And her story is especially, I think, resonant these days because there's been a lot of, we all are in our own sphere, so I'm not sure what information you're seeing in your various social media, but where I exist, sort of at the crossroads of British history and modern celebrity gossip, is the whole tabloid culture, and what that has to do with the British royal family has been under discussion, again, for various reasons I won't get into in this episode of this podcast. But the thing with Caroline of Brunswick is she was kind of the first real tabloid member of the royal family. And from then on, that's just kind of been part of what the British royal family's whole deal is. So I'll just explain the story. It's got twists. It's got turns. There's a cameo appearance by Jane Austen. And this is one of my favorite women from history currently who I know about. So her name was Caroline Amelia Elizabeth of Brunswick. She was born on May 17th, 1768. Her mother was Princess Augusta of Great Britain. So her mother was the sister of King George III of Britain. So Caroline was the niece of the British king. But her father was basically German. So she grew up in basically Germany. This was in the time period before Germany was called Germany, but basically she spoke German. She lived in a place that is now considered part of Germany. So her father was called the Duke of Brunswick Wolfenbüttel. So her father was a duke. Her mother was a princess. So she's basically royalty, sort of like minor royalty. She wasn't a princess, but her mother was. The thing is that her parents, Caroline's parents, Augusta and the Duke of Brunswick Wolfenbüttel, did not get along with each other very well. They, in fact, seemed to quite dislike each other. So the Duke had a mistress whose name was Louise Hertford. And this was a sort of time and culture and class of people where, like, you just had your mistress and your mistress just hung out with you and you didn't really hide it. And that's kind of what was going on. Princess Augusta, Caroline's mother, was not a fan of that whole situation. And so Caroline just kind of got caught in the middle of this not great relationship between her parents. So she was sort of like, the father would be like, oh, your mother's so terrible. And the mother would be like, oh, your father's so terrible. Like, send him a message from me, send her a message from me. And she was just kind of like stuck in the middle of all of that. So like in terms of relationship role modeling, she didn't have the best role models to learn about what being a married couple was like. As I mentioned, she grew up in basically Germany. Her first language was German, but she was taught English, partially because her mother was British, but also because she was a minor royal and she was similar age to the British king's son, whose name was also George, and who was unmarried at this point. So basically, sort of like in a Cinderella scenario, every eligible young woman was being raised to be maybe the wife of the prince. And even though if you're got like a mental family tree in your head, Caroline was the niece of the British king. The prince is the son of the British king. The two of them are first cousins, but that was like not super weird at the time. It was a little weird, but at the same time, she lived in Germany. It's not like they grew up together. So like, we're going to get into other stories in other episodes. Like this could be a lot weirder, but it's basically sort of like a Targaryen Game of Thrones, sort of like staying within your own family sort of situation. Anyway, so Caroline being raised to be maybe the wife when she grows up of her first cousin, Prince George. So they taught her English, and that's kind of, one gets the sense that's sort of like the main thing that she was taught. Her parents weren't big into education in general of her. So she didn't get taught she just didn't get a lot of education. So she wasn't as book smart as other people might have been around her. She also was very much kept away from socializing, especially with boys and men. So sort of like a Rapunzel-ish situation where she's like literally kept in her room, not allowed to visit. Like she couldn't even know, like as a girl, she couldn't play with boys. As a young woman, she couldn't like dance with boys. The only servants she ever interacted with were female. But the thing is that sort of like Rapunzel in the movie Tangled, she's got like a really spirited sort of personality. And so even though she's being stuck in a room, she's like, that's not going to stop her. But also she's nothing like Rapunzel in Tangled because, as you'll find out, she's somewhat less wholesome than that. But basically, so she was allowed to go to balls sometimes. Like she begged and begged and they finally let her go to balls, but she wasn't allowed to dance. She had to sit and play cards with the older women. So it's just sort of like, of course she's going to rebel against this. Like she's got this like huge opinionated spirit. She's not being educated very much. She doesn't have an outlet for her energy. She's not allowed to dance or interact with men. So she just kind of builds up a whole lot of rebellion sort of personality type traits. So what happened is when she was a teenager, I want to say like around 15 years old, but don't quote me on that. But basically, her parents were at a ball. I feel like the ball might have been in her own house because they were able to get to her pretty quickly. But basically, she was tired of not being allowed to go to balls. And so she pretended that she was going into labor. Now, she was a young, unmarried teenager who had, as far as anyone knows, like never interacted with any male person other than her own father. So that was surprising, but she was like pretending she was in labor. She was like crying and screaming. I don't know how she knew what labor looked like, but she was apparently impersonating it very well. So her parents rushed to her side. They called a midwife. And then as soon as the midwife got there, Caroline basically stopped pretending to be in labor. And she was like, guess what? I'm not having a baby. I just want you to pay attention to me. I'm going to keep doing stuff like this if you don't let me go to the ball and dance. So like, this is the sort of person we're dealing with. Like when she doesn't get what she wants, she might use unusual methods to get her point across. Unconventional, one might say. And I also that was a sort of detail where I was first reading a biography of Caroline of Brunswick. And I just thought like she pretended to be going into labor to make a point to her parents is sort of like, I just respect that a lot as like a teenage girl power move. Basically, what did she look like? Apparently, she was really cute. There's portraits of her, like contemporaneous portraits. She had a round face, curly blonde hair, and just sort of like generally sort of just a sweet, pretty looking sort of person. And then because of who her parents were, her mother being a princess, the sister of the British king, her father being this duke, she was an eligible young bachelorette. So her mother was busy trying to find like the right person for her to marry, but also like secretly hoping that maybe Caroline would marry her cousin, Prince George, which again was not as weird as it might be. It was still weird. Basically, but in the meantime, Caroline, who like we know about her, she did this like fake giving birth scenario to get attention from her parents. Like they tried to trap her in her room, but she is clever, she's smart. She would go like horseback riding around the town, and apparently while she was doing that, she fell in love with a man who may or may not have been an Irish soldier. We're not sure. But basically her parents forbid her from marrying this guy, whoever he was, because of his quote unquote low status. Now, rumors, a lot of what we know about Caroline is like documented fact, but a lot of what has been documented are rumors written by people who, because of what she did later, were sort of slandering her and sort of making fun of her and sort of trying to paint her to be this crazy monster person. Basically, a rumor exists in some writing from around that time, not when she was a teenager, but from later, that she secretly gave birth to a baby. And the father was this Irish soldier. But my guess, I mean, she might have given birth to a baby. She might have, like, entirely plausible. But also, I feel like the whole pretending to give birth is so weird and so unusual that somebody might have just sort of confused that whole story. Basically, for whatever reason, she did not get engaged until she was 26 years old in the year 1794. And I just want to, like, give a little hot take, which is, it's sort of a common perception that people in olden times got married when they were like 12 or whatever. And a lot of times like an engagement might happen or a betrothal when someone is really young. But the average age for women getting married in this time period was around 26. Like, so she wasn't like an old maid type person that she didn't get married till then. That's not weird. Like she was super eligible. Lots of people wanted to marry her and they just kind of tried to wait until they found the right person, and they did. And who did she get engaged to in 1794, age 26? Her first cousin, Prince George of Britain. So this was not a love match to begin with, in that Caroline and George had never met at this point. And also, I just need to like side note, Prince George at this time was like maybe the least popular member of the British royal family. And the British royal family itself was like really unpopular. So he was kind of like technically a catch, quote unquote, but like, well, let's get into it. So 1794, this is shortly after the American Revolution. So it was Prince George's father, King George III, he's the king from Hamilton, etc., who was the king when the Americans did the whole Hamilton thing, I'm not American, but the whole thing, Betsy Ross flag, etc. So basically, the British people were mad at the British royal family because they had lost this colony that was like providing them with lots of goods and materials. And that was one reason why the British people were mad at the British royal family. But also the country was like massively in debt, but the royal family was just kind of like spending like money was no issue at all. It's the sort of thing where like when the economy is doing really badly, if the people in charge are just like lavishly spending money on luxuries, that's going to make the like everyday person a little bit mad at your royal family. And of the whole royal family, the person who was the most sort of shopaholic, like just not paying attention to the mood of things, was Prince George, who was like, even considering this is like the 18th century Britain royal family, the whole family spending too much money. Like even he was spending so much money that even the rest of the royal family was like, whoa, he's spending too much money. So basically Parliament cut off his allowance. And they said, and this is like exactly like the beginning of sort of like Cinderella / maybe a Regency era romance novel. And we are going to get into the Regency era in like 10, 15 years from now. Basically, they said, you won't get your money back until you marry someone, ideally a princess. So Prince George was like, okay, well, then I need to set up some sort of marriage of convenience so I can get my money, so I can get back to buying like, I don't even know, expensive shoes or whatever he was doing. So he had a mistress at this time. He had lots of mistresses. He was like not a monogamous sort of guy. So his main mistress was named Frances Villiers, the Countess of Jersey, and she was pretty amazing herself. And so he was like, Frances, I need to choose a wife. And she's like winding her fingers together, like lightning strikes, like at mood lighting. Like she's just like, oh, I'll help you find a mistress. So basically, Frances Villiers is the mistress. She knows that she can never be the wife for various reasons. So she wanted to help him find a wife who would not take away too much of her power. She wanted to be like how Caroline's father had the mistress who like he took as his date to parties and stuff. Frances wanted to be like the main number one mistress. So she sort of thought like, well, we need to find a wife for my lover who is like sort of a pushover and sort of like not well educated and just somebody who like will just sit around and have babies while I, Frances Villiers, can just live this amazing life. So she sort of like snooped around and she had lots of friends and they're all good at gossip. And they told her the word on the street was that Caroline of Brunswick was uneducated and sort of like socially awkward and seemed like she'd be sort of like a good, easy to control puppet type person. So she was like, George, I think you should marry your first cousin, Caroline of Brunswick. And he was like, great, because I want to get more money to buy curtains or whatever. And then also Parliament was like, this is great because they wanted to make an alliance with Brunswick, which was where Caroline was from. And so everything's great. The king sent a man over to Brunswick to pick up Caroline, just make sure everything's okay and like escort her back for the wedding. And the man who he sent over was called Lord Malmesbury. And this is where it gets even more sort of like the setup for a really amazing Regency romance novel. So Lord Malmesbury arrives in Brunswick and he finds Caroline. She's just like really cute, 26-year-old, little ringlet hair, full of life, just like really interesting, kind of weird, and also super sheltered and not super well educated. And as it turns out, she was in no condition to marry the heir to the throne of Great Britain. It's sort of like the beginning of the Princess Diaries, where it's just like, oh my God, she doesn't know which fork is which fork. Her hair is kind of frizzy. She like makes these sort of like weird, inappropriate jokes, like / the beginning of My Fair Lady, basically. So Lord Malmesbury was like, okay, I'm not going to bring her back to England right now. I'm just going to stay here in Brunswick and like teach her table manners and like how to have good dinner conversation. So he was giving her princess lessons. But the thing is, Caroline was like, I don't really feel like learning this stuff. Like, I'm engaged to Prince George, so let's just get on with it. And eventually, like, her just weird, interesting charm was so much that Malmesbury was like, you know what? Like, I'm into this. Like, I think she's pretty great. And also she's clearly doesn't care about learning manners. And so I guess we're just going to head back to England. The two of them didn't fall in love, but like, let's get some fan fiction going, because I think that would be an interesting story. Basically, Malmesbury was like, well, this is the best we're going to get. So let's go back to England. So he accompanied her back to England, where she met Frances Villiers, who became one of her ladies in waiting, because of course she did. And then she went to meet Prince George. She said about him that he was nothing like as handsome as his portrait, which is like a total reverse Anne of Cleves scenario. And I love it. So she met him and she was like, ugh, this guy. And then he saw her and he was like, ugh, this person. I think she made some like off-color jokes or whatever, because Caroline just got a Caroline. And so basically it was like loathing at first sight. Like, they both like, it's not just like, ooh, I don't know if I want to marry this person. They were both like, oh my God, like I literally hate this person. But they were royals and the engagement had been announced, and so they couldn't call it off. So Prince George basically just got drunk for 3 days. And they were married 3 days after they met. Their marriage was on April 8th, 1795. George was literally drunk throughout the ceremony. And this is where we get to one of our big plot twist moments, which is that he had been married before. So Prince George, before he met Frances, the like scheming lady in waiting / mistress, he had secretly and illegally married a woman named Maria Fitzherbert. And there was an episode of the podcast Noble Blood about this a bit ago. But basically, George had fallen in love with a woman named Maria Fitzherbert, who was a Catholic. They basically lived as like quote unquote man and wife for 8 years. They had some children together, but he hadn't gotten his father's permission to marry her, and she's Catholic, so it was not like officially recognized as a marriage, but they were like, they had had a marriage ceremony, so he was sort of married, but not really. Anyway, so he was drunk for the wedding. He hated her. She hated him, as well she should. He sounded awful. Basically, he was super drunk. He like tripped and fell on the ground, and she just like left him there. And that was their wedding night. Yet, but somehow, well, I mean, I guess we know how. 9 months later, Caroline gave birth to a baby, like 9 months after the wedding. So like these two people, sounds like, had sex once. Spoiler, ever. So she had a daughter who is named Charlotte, which was the name of her aunt / mother-in-law, the wife of the king. Anyway, so Princess Charlotte was born. And by then they had been married for 9 months. Prince George had come to just like profoundly hate Caroline even more than when he'd first met her. After the baby was born, he changed his will, and he said he wanted to leave everything to his wife, Maria Fitzherbert, the Catholic who he sort of was married to already, and left Caroline 1 shilling, which was just like making some sort of stupid point to his like postnatal wife. Anyway, she had a baby. He hated her. But remember how everybody in England hated the royal family, and especially Prince George? And so the tabloids were just sort of coming into being at this point. And so people from around the castle started like spilling secrets to them, saying like, guess what? So you know how Caroline just had this baby? Like, it turns out that Prince George is like being really mean to her. The whole royal family kind of hates her, and the tabloids started publishing this. And so then the public started being like, oh my God, the royal family is being really mean to Caroline. And they all basically took her side, partially because she was amazing, but also more likely partially because they just hated the royal family. They saw her being mistreated by them, and then she became like a figurehead for their all sort of like nascent rebellion feelings. So like this got to a point where Caroline would take baby Charlotte out, like walking in like their little baby stroller, and people would like cheer for her. So she did this more and more often because it probably made her feel good, probably made the royal family feel annoyed. Like, basically, she was in this family that hated her, being isolated from literally everybody, but the public was there. They were on her side. And so, just like today, if you read Lainey gossip, the courtiers, the people who were hanging around the palace, just like kept spilling more and more secrets to the tabloids to try and make whoever they supported, the courtiers supported, look better or worse. So basically, Frances Villiers, her name started coming up in the story. So it was like a real life soap opera situation where people, just like the everyday people reading the newspapers, the people who couldn't read, people would tell them about it. They're just like, oh my God, what did Caroline do? And then Frances did this, Prince George did this. And basically, the more the royal family treated Caroline badly, the more the people of Britain loved her. And then that made the royal family hate Caroline even more. But basically, these were two married people who like hated each other. And so they legally separated, which is like for late 18th century, like not a common thing to happen for the heir to the throne at all. But this is great. Caroline got to be free. She headed off to live in her own residence, like out of town. She wasn't in London. She got to live in the country. And she grew up trapped in this room, not allowed to dance. And then she got into this like toxic, awful family marriage relationship. And now she got to just like live her own beautiful life. And so, again, this is where it's like, what did she do? What are rumors? Who's to say? It sounds like Caroline just like leaned into her freedom and started having the most amazing time. She flirted with like literally every man she met, perhaps had flings with the various men who she had over as house guests. She was just like throwing parties, having an amazing time. But she missed her daughter, Charlotte, who she had to leave. So Charlotte was off being raised by like governesses and nannies. Back with the royal family, they had a shared custody arrangement, but she didn't get to see her daughter as much as she wanted to, which is where Caroline, this takes another turn you might not expect, which is that she starts sort of collecting other people's babies. So just stick with me for this. So basically, Caroline made a friend, sort of a frenemy, in her little country home whose name was Lady Douglas. And so she told Lady Douglas in 1802, she said that she was like, can I tell you a secret, Lady Douglas? And Lady Douglas is like, yeah, girl, yeah. And Caroline was like, I am secretly pregnant. Don't tell anybody. But she didn't look especially pregnant, as per Lady Douglas. And then shortly after that, this baby boy named William Austen came on the scene, who was 3 months old. It was sort of like unclear, had it been Caroline's baby she had 3 months ago, or did she just like adopt someone else's baby? But like, who is this baby and where did he come from? She adopted other children as well. Eventually, she had collected 9 orphan children, but William Austen was always her favorite. A few years later, Caroline and Lady Douglas they just, their friendship sort of crumpled into a horrible bonfire. So Lady Douglas, and this is all, again, like in the tabloids, like people were telling these secrets because like the people of Britain just like loved hearing about Caroline. So Lady Douglas said that Caroline had been like sending her mean letters. And then she also alleged that Caroline had committed infidelity on her husband and that William Austen was Caroline's son. The father was someone who's not her husband. So Caroline wrote a letter to the editor of the local newspaper. And she wrote it because the grammar is like not perfect. The writing style is kind of odd. Like she's got her own way of writing that's like, again, she was not like, her education was not like top tier, and also English is not her first language. So it's like, yeah, she wrote this. This is like her style. So basically the royal family was like, oh my God, how is she back in the tabloids? Did we not get rid of her? And so what they decided to do, which was kind of the worst possible idea if they wanted to like make this scandal go away, is they launched an official investigation into whether or not Caroline was the mother of baby William Austen. So this whole situation became known as the Delicate Investigation. And it was supposed to be secret, but obviously everybody was telling everything to the tabloids, and they kept doing that. So the commission who were investigating the Delicate Investigation, the Delicate investigators were all old white men, Like literally the prime minister was part of it, the Lord Chief Justice, like just men in their like, British judge wigs and whatever, just being like, let's just like investigate the sex life of this woman. Anyway, so they called Lady Douglas to testify. And just remember that Lady Douglas at this point hates Caroline, had been leaking stories to the press about Caroline. And basically this whole thing was her fault. And so she testified and she was like, Caroline is basically a nymphomaniac. She sleeps with literally every man, even the servants. She tried to seduce me. I think she's like she's an out-of-control nymphomaniac. But then Caroline's servants came to testify and they were all like, we didn't see anything weird. Also, she's our boss and she pays us well. And then, surprise final witness, like how to get away with murder moment, a woman named Sophia Austin appeared and she was like, hey, my name is Sophia Austin. William Austin is my son. It's not Caroline's son. Let's just all move on. And so they did, sort of. The delicate investigation ended with them finding that Caroline had not cheated on her husband. This was not her illegitimate baby, but she was forbidden to see Charlotte, her daughter, while the investigation was going on. And when the investigation ended, she was only allowed to see Charlotte once a week on supervised visits. And now we're just going to take a break for a word from our sponsors.
As a podcast network, our first priority has always been audio and the stories we're able to share with you. But at Realm, we also sell some pretty cool merch, and organizing that was made both possible and easy with Shopify. When you think about successful businesses like Aloe or Allbirds or Skims, an often overlooked secret is the business behind the business that makes selling and, for shoppers, buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. That's because nobody does selling better than Shopify. It's the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret that's definitely worth talking about is that Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%. That's more happy customers and way more sales going. If you're hoping to grow your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more, sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/realm, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/realm to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/realm.
Do you know what lies within nothing?
No.
Do you know where it ends? Do you want to know?
Yes.
Counterbalance, a high fantasy audio drama. Season 2, coming 15th of October 2023. Learn more on trilunas.com.
People often look at me with confusion when I ask them what their only one in the room story is. They think it has to be like mine, where I went to a 600-person event and discovered that I was the only Black person there. I know. Horrifying, right? Hi, I'm Laura Cathcart-Robbins, and I am the host and creator of the podcast Only One in the Room. Every week, my co-host Scott Slaughter and I invite you to join us for an hour and lose yourself in someone's only one story. This podcast is for anyone who has ever felt alone in a room full of people, which is to say that this podcast is for everyone.
I'm Brennan Storr.
I'm Paul Bestall.
We're the Ghost Story Guys.
And every 2 weeks, we explore first-person stories of encounters with the paranormal from all around the world.
Then we have some fun reacting to those stories. We like to say our goal is to scare the hell out of you, then make you laugh.
Belief in the paranormal is not required. All you need is a love of great storytelling and curiosity about the world around you.
Come find the Ghost Story Guys on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else fine podcasts live, or at ghoststoryguys.com.
And we're back. And the supervisor of these visits was Caroline's mother. Flashback, remember, Princess Augusta, the sister of the king. So she was the chaperone. Basically, her mother had been terrible to her as a child. Now her mother was there supervising. Her mother basically also hated her. It was just like not a good scenario. But then in 1811, everything changes substantially because the king, King George III, the one from Hamilton, he was declared basically permanently insane. So he had had mental health issues for quite a while, on and off, and just getting worse and worse. And that's a whole other discussion, like what was going on. There was a movie made about him called The Madness of King George. That was this guy. It's a good movie. Helen Mirren is in it, playing his wife. But basically, he was just like so ill, he couldn't be the king anymore, but he was the king. But so what do you do when the king can't like do his king job is you bring out a regent, who's a person who will like do the day-to-day king type work. And so Prince George became the official regent, and thus began the Regency era. So this is just, like empire waist dresses, like Pride and Prejudice, like the Regency era. So this is what's happening. But the thing with this, the regent, Prince George, is like, oh my God, I have so much more power now. And I have just been like obsessively hating my wife now for years. So he just started passing more rules to punish Caroline for just trying to live her life. So he stopped letting her visit with her daughter. And he started saying like anyone who's friends with her or goes to her parties is like not friends with me anymore. So all the friends started dumping Caroline to stay friends with Prince George. It was all just like petty high school stuff. So Caroline was like, okay, sucks, but I'm sure there's a way that I can fight back for all of this. And she's clever. And so she tried to find, like, the tabloid press was still super supporting her. Like, she had the entire British population of like working people on her side, as well as all the newspapers and tabloids. But she needed something else to fight back against this because her husband was kind of the king at this point. So she found a guy named Henry Brougham, who was a politician that hated the royal family. So they began a campaign of anti-royal family propaganda. So just like sending stories to the tabloids, which they had been doing, but just like with this guy helping out. He's kind of like her PR expert. He was just better at planting better stories. So Prince George was mad about that. So then he leaked stuff to the tabloids to make Caroline look bad. And so anyway, it was just like all very much on the headlines everywhere. Everybody knew about it. Jane Austen was around because it's the Regency era and that was her time to shine. And she was entirely on Team Caroline in the whole scenario. She wrote, I think this was in her journals or something, or in a letter, she wrote about Caroline, quote, "Poor woman, I shall support her as long as I can because she is a woman and because I hate her husband." Like, if you're not sure whose side to be on in this story, like Jane Austen thinks Prince George is the worst, supports Caroline. So, there's some information for you. The other notable literati of the time also had opinions on this. Like, for instance, Lord Byron was against Caroline, which again, if you're like, which side should I be on? It's like, well, Jane Austen's on Caroline's side. Lord Byron is on the prince's side. So just like, choose your fighter. So basically everything was just intense and crazy and like not great for her mental health. And finally, Caroline sorted out a way with her ally, the politician who was helping her out. She negotiated a deal with the foreign secretary where she got to move to Italy, and they would give her generous allowance if she just basically stayed away forever. And she was like, yeah, let's do this. So she purchased a villa on Lake Como, famously now the place where Amal and George Clooney live. So just like glamorous. She hired new servants to go help her out there, including a man named Bartolomeo Pargami. So she and Bartolomeo became very close, and everyone basically assumed they were lovers, even though they were both technically married to other people. And there's a certain philosophy in history that I just find simplifies things, where it's like, if you find people in history and it's like, it seems like they might have been sleeping together, like they probably were. So let's just like go ahead with that assumption. So this is all alleged, but like, I hope Caroline was sleeping with him because she deserves everything good. So she and her servants, including Bartolomeo, they basically lived in Lake Como and they went on these amazing, fabulous vacation adventures. Like they went on a Mediterranean cruise. They visited Malta and Constantinople and Nazareth. So remember, she grew up like trapped in a room, like literally trapped in a room. She had to play cards with old women instead of dancing. Like, she was just like living her best life. There's a description of when she and Bartolomeo visited Jerusalem. She entered the city riding on a donkey among a convoy of camels, which is just like, do it, Caroline. Like, yes, just like you escaped your horrible husband, the British royal family, which were being the worst to you, and now you're just like living your life. I love it. But then, as per ever, she was being so amazing that people had to write about it, and then stories of her adventures got back to England. The people were like, oh my God, she's amazing, like #goals. And the British royal family was just like, ugh, her again. Why won't she go away? And Prince George was just at this point like fully obsessed with how much he hated her and wanted to destroy her. So while she was traveling around Europe, etc., her daughter Princess Charlotte had grown up in this period of time. And she got married to Prince Leopold of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld in 1816. And then she died a year later in childbirth complications. So Charlotte, remember, she had grown up like she was in the stroller being pushed around and everybody cheered. Like, she was like the people's princess, the like original people's princess. And so when she died, it became like a national tragedy. Percy Shelley, the husband of Mary Shelley, published a pamphlet called An Address to the People on the Death of the Princess Charlotte, basically a tribute to her. Like, everyone was so upset this 18-year-old princess had died. And now, like, also there was no heir to the throne, which complicated everything. And also everybody hated the British royal family. Like, the only people that people liked were Caroline and Charlotte. And Caroline was in Italy. Charlotte was now dead. So basically Prince George is like, okay, he needs an heir. Like, he's not the king, but he's basically acting as a king. He's the regent. And he needs to have a legitimate child to become king after him. So he's like, ugh, but I'm married to Caroline. Like, I'm never going to have sex with her ever again. I hate her like so viciously. So he's like, what I need to do is divorce her so I can marry someone else, so I can have a new baby who can be my heir. So he tried to get Parliament to agree to let him get a divorce. And they're like, you're not Henry VIII. # also, Henry VIII didn't actually get divorced. They're all just annulments. And also the government was so unpopular. Everybody loves Caroline. They're like, no, we're not going to let you divorce Caroline. So Caroline was just like, all right, you know what? I'm just going to come back to England, sort this shit out. She bid farewell to Bartolomeo, her maybe lover, and hopped on a boat back to England. When she arrived, literal riots broke out. Everyone was so excited to see her. She was like the main character in their telenovela there. For real, everybody freaked out about it. Also, the British people were just like hating the British royal family more and more and more and more, which made them love her more and more and more and more. So they're all just like really excited to have her back there. A bunch of members of the Royal Guard, like the soldiers, like they mutinied. Like they gave up being soldiers because they loved her so much. Like, anyway, Prince George was just like, how can I get rid of this goddamn woman? And he was like, well, there's rumors that she's been having an affair with a servant called Bartolomeo. So if she had adultery, then they could get a divorce. And so he's like, okay, I'm going to hold a public trial because, God, like, of course, what else can happen at this point? So witnesses from all across Europe and like the Mediterranean from Caroline and Bartolomeo's cruise came by, and they were all probably being paid by somebody or the other to say whatever, but some of them said they'd seen the two, Caroline and Bartolomeo, kissing. They'd seen them together like semi-naked. But with every like new scandal, it just made the British people love Caroline even more. More than 800 petitions were circulated with more than 1 million signatures from people who wanted the case against her to be dismissed. But Prince George would not stop trying to divorce her. So he was like, we need to find more witnesses, better witnesses. So he like sent people to Milan to try and basically pay off people to say like 100% we saw her sleeping with Bartolomeo. So the number of witnesses he was able to buy, / maybe they were real witnesses, like the whole thing just doesn't seem very legitimate to me. Anyway, things were not looking good for Caroline. So she was like considering maybe taking a deal, like a payoff to like maybe get a divorce, but she could only get a divorce if one of the other of them admitted to adultery. And she's like, well, I'm not going to do that But then everything changed. Ultimate plot twist. January 19th, 1820, the king died. And so Prince George now became King George IV, which meant, because they were still married, Caroline was now the queen. Sort of. Like, she wouldn't be officially the queen until she had a crown put on her head at the coronation. And so he was basically, at this point, it's just like, just looking for like loopholes. He's just like, well, if she doesn't come to coronation, then she'll never get a crown on her head, then she'll never be the queen. Like, he's just like, give up. Like, God, I hate this guy. So his coronation was planned, and he was like, what if we just don't invite Caroline? But she found out about it. Obviously, the date is publicly known. So it was being held at Westminster Abbey. So she just like showed up, crashed the coronation to presumably just like march down the aisle, grab a crown, put it on her head. So she tried to get in, but the like staff there stopped her. They're like, no, you're not on the guest list. So then she was like, guess what? There's more doors. So she ran around the building and tried another set of doors, which these doors didn't open. So then she ran around again and tried to enter through the main door, just like sliding in among the crowd, like, how do you do, fellow crowd? But she would not be deterred. They kicked her out again. She ran around again, and she found yet another door in the back. She snuck in, but then one of the new king, her husband's staff, somehow persuaded her to go back outside, which she did. And all this like running around Westminster Abbey just was like pretty undignified. It was like a step too far for the adoring public. And they were all just like, you know what? We don't love her anymore. So they jeered and booed her as she left in her carriage. And then she fell ill that night, sort of like, and again, I'm not American, but this happened to one of your presidents. I saw it on Drunk History. He gave a speech and it was raining, and then he got sick and died. So basically, she got sick. She got sick from being locked out of Westminster Abbey. And it was the early 1800s, so medicine was not amazing. Her condition got worse and worse and worse over the next 3 weeks. And it started to look like she was not going to get better. Caroline was like, got it. Like, I accept this. And so she burned all of her papers, letters, and memoirs, which is just like, ugh, if only those hadn't been burned, this would have been like some great writing, I bet. She wrote a new will and organized her own funeral arrangements. And this is just like, of course she did this. So she requested to be buried back in Brunswick, not in England, which had not been a great place for her. And she wanted to have the following inscription put on her tomb, quote, "Here lies Caroline, the injured Queen of England." So Caroline of Brunswick died on August 7th, 1821, aged 53. It seems like she died of some sort of cancer type situation, but rumors were flying around that she was maybe poisoned, which is like, I feel like not impossible given everything that's been going on in the story. So she had been kind of the queen, even though she was never coronated. So it was just like polite for her to get a funeral procession through the streets of London. But the whole thing, the people of England like loved her again. You know, they didn't like her for the running around the castle, but then she died. So now she's like people's princess again, people's queen. So the people planning her funeral were like, ugh, like we're pretty close to like rebellion/riots in London. So like having the like effigy of Queen Caroline go through the town would probably lead to more riots. So what if, so basically, usually the funeral procession goes like through London, but they're like, what if our funeral procession goes like around London to try and make it be not a riot? But of course that didn't work because everybody wanted to pay tribute to their fallen heroine the best way they knew how, like in her honor, to throw one final riot. So people threw stones and bricks at the soldiers who were in the procession. So the soldiers shot back into the crowd, and when that didn't work, they waved their sabers around while riding on their horses. Basically, it was chaos, and 2 people ended up dying, a carpenter named Richard Honey and a bricklayer named George Francis. So after everything simmered down, this is just an interesting side note, just sort of like the everyday people, they raised money in a kind of Regency-era Kickstarter to erect a tomb in memory of these 2 men, Richard Honey and George Francis, both of whom had died leaving children behind. So just sort of showed like the spirit of like unity among the working classes. Like Caroline's supporters were like good people. So the riot happened and the funeral procession organizers were like, okay, let's just go through the city. Hopefully that will stop the riot. They did. And it did basically. And the route ended at the waterfront. And her body was placed on a ship to be sent back to Brunswick for her to be buried in Brunswick Cathedral. Her body is like sailing over to Brunswick Cathedral. And some English ministers are like in a different boat, like heading over to like just go check in the tomb to make sure everything's okay. And when they showed up, they found that the tomb had already been inscribed with, "Here lies Caroline, the injured Queen of England." And they were like, ooh, what if it doesn't say that? And the people in Brunswick were like, but we carved it. Like, we're the grave carvers, and this is what we did. So then a huge fight broke out between the Brunswick church people and the English ministers, which is just like her whole life. All it's been like, Caroline just like instigates such passion in people. Ultimately, the grave was changed, and so they put a boring Latin verse on it, like all queens get. But anyway, just like one last fuck you from Caroline to the royal family. So, sort of like Queen Anne from The Favourite, whose story was written by people who hated her. And so for a long time, we just kind of thought she was like useless and whatever. Caroline's story has not been reclaimed by people like me who love her until now. But the book that I read to get most of this information from was called Caroline and Charlotte, Lives of Caroline of Brunswick and Princess Charlotte of Wales by Alison Plowden from 1989. It's a good book for informational purposes, but it also leans a lot onto like, you get the sense Alison Plowden, the author, kind of believes a lot of the worst rumors about Caroline and thinks she's kind of like useless and stupid. There's one movie out about this, and there's a couple other books as well if you want to read more about Caroline, but I think the best way to honor her is just by like telling the story to other people. And as I just sort of like as a coda to the whole thing. So 16 years after Caroline died, and her husband, George IV, he didn't have any more legitimate children. So the throne went to his younger brother and then to his younger brother. And like none of these brothers had any children. And it's just like, oh my God, who's going to be the next king of England? Plot twist, not a king. So 16 years after Caroline died, another high-spirited, opinionated young German princess arrived in England to take on an important role. This was Princess Alexandrina Victoria of Kent, the only legitimate grandchild of King George III. She was crowned Queen Victoria in Westminster Abbey, the same place that years earlier her aunt, Caroline of Brunswick, had faced her final humiliation. Queen Victoria became known for her strict moral code, stubborn nature, devotion to her country and to the monarchy. Basically, Queen Victoria became one of history's most well-behaved women, while Caroline of Brunswick is remembered not much at all. Until now. So I think, inspired by some of my most favorite other podcasts, I would like to give each of the stories that I tell here a score. So I'm not scoring the person. I don't think anyone's life is more valuable or important than another person's life, but just like the story of it, like the whole thing of it. And so I have 4 different categories. The first of which is scandaliciousness. So this is like, of the whole situation, not just like how scandalous was this whole story, but like how scandalicious was it? Like the details of the scandal. So this is on a scale of, I guess, 0 to 10. And when we're looking at Caroline of Brunswick's story, we've got the like fake pretending to have a baby to get her parents' attention as a teenager. We've got the rumors that she might have had a baby as a teenager. She wanted to marry an Irish soldier, despite the fact that she was royal and then she wasn't allowed to do that. We've got the whole, she refused to be taught princess manners. But then like, oh, that's just sort of like interestingness, I guess. Like the scandaliciousness of it, like the liciousness comes in with the whole Bartolomeo situation. Well, actually, first, no. So when she goes to live in the country and she's rumored to have all of these, flirting with all these men, taking all these lovers, which like, I really hope she did. I hope she just like had lots of really great sex. So there's the room she had the lovers. Then there was like the William Austen situation where it's like, was that her baby? Was it not? The fact that that went to like a tribunal, like the prime minister was trying to decide, like, did she have an extramarital affair? And then the Bartolomeo of it all, going off to Lake Como to live this just sort of like life of like Miss Fisher's murder mysteries, like just like deliciousness. Like there's a lot. And then coming back, like the riots, this is just like, there's a lot of scandaliciousness to this. On a scale of 0 to 10, I'm going to give her a 7 in that category. I think a firm 7. I mean, we're going to be looking at, over the course of this whole podcast series, lots of interesting women, lots of scandaliciousness. And I think for the first episode, this is like a strong start, a 7. The next category is scheminess. Like, how crafty was she? Well, not just like how smart was she, what were her sort of like plans, but like how schemy was she? Like on a scale of like 0 to Cersei Lannister, like where is she in like secret backroom dealings and like secretly manipulating people and stuff? And so the thing with Caroline Brunswick is that she did have some scheminess for sure. The whole like writing a letter to the editor, like leaking stories to the tabloid press, like hiring a PR advocate situation. Like in that respect, her scheminess was great. But in the respect of like, she didn't do a lot of like backroom dealing. She didn't do a lot of like jockeying for power against other people. Like she just wanted to live her own best life. She wasn't really out, seemingly to me, I don't think, for like power or glory or anything. She just wanted to like have some fun. So she was schemy. I'd say she's medium schemy. I'm going to give her a 4 out of 10 for scheminess, because there's definitely some scheminess there. Like the tabloid involvement, the like walking with her, the going for walks, the like really cultivating the British people's anti-monarchist feelings for her own ends. That was good. I'm going to bump her. I'm going to give her a 5 for scheminess. The next category is significance. And so this is like, again, no one person in the history of everything. Like everyone's life is everyone's life. But in terms of like, if we were looking at somebody, it's like, did she invent penicillin? Did she invade a country? Like, what are the long-term repercussions of the events of the story that we looked at? And so for Caroline Brunswick, regrettably, she was never crowned queen. Her daughter, Charlotte, died young, so there's not like a long lineage to look at. Like Caroline of Brunswick did amazing things for herself. I think she really reached self-actualization in the course of her just like really interesting bonkers life. But in terms of like the long-term historical repercussions, like, okay, so if she and her husband had gotten along better, maybe they would have had more children. Maybe those children would have become the next monarchs of England. Maybe Queen Victoria would never have become queen. Like there's some significance to what she did. The fact that England got really close to a full revolution because of her, just sort of like everything she was up to. But it didn't have a revolution. Like if there had been an actual like revolution, if like a French Revolution moment had happened with like the end of monarchy, that would be huge significance. But I'm going to give her a bit for significance. Like her very existence in the world, everyone gets at least one. Everyone's significant in their own way. And the fact that she hated her husband so much that they never had any more children did have repercussions for the whole future of the British royal family. But overall, I'm just going to give her, I think, a 3 for significance. And then the final factor, this is a score out of 40. The final factor is what I'm just calling is sexism, basically. So like how much was her life thwarted by patriarchy and by sexism and by people just like not just letting her live because she was a woman? There's a number, we're going to be looking at so many cool people. Like I can't wait to record these other episodes, but like there's people who because they were women, they were able to accomplish great things because they could get into certain spaces. Okay, that's pretty rare. It's usually people, like the people we're looking at, will be like, they accomplished great things despite the fact they were a woman. They accomplished great things and then they got burned as a witch because they were a woman. Like, sexism is such a huge part of all of this stuff. So, like, in terms of significance, like if the British royal family had let women become heirs, like Augusta, Caroline's mother, was the older sister of George. So, like, if it wasn't a son to son thing, Augusta could have been the queen, and then Caroline would have been the next queen. Like, her life would have been totally different. And then the whole thing about, like, her husband was just like having affairs and mistresses, and like it was no secret, illegitimate children. But then they're like, the fact that he was so just like, oh my God, did she have sex with another man? And that was like, I mean, basically every woman's story we're going to be looking at in this podcast. Sexism is always like, I can't think of a story where that's not going to be there. So we're giving her points. It's like making up points. It's like a bonus for like how much sexism did she have to put up with, and yet she still led this interesting life. This is tricky on a scale of 0 to 10. It's definitely at least a 5. I think I'm going to stick with a 5 for sexism. So let me just do some quick math. It's 10, it's 20. Caroline Brunswick's score is a 20 out of 40 on the Vulgar History scale. So that's the story. If you want to read more about her, like, again, the main book I used for research here is Caroline and Charlotte, Lives of Caroline of Brunswick and Princess Charlotte of Wales by Alison Plowden, which, again, it's like the information is good, but the book is just like really down on her. It's just like a newer biography might be better. And if you know of one, hey, let me know. You can email me at vulgarhistorypod@gmail.com. I've also got like 7,000 million social media things to tell you about. But basically, my name is Anne Foster. This is the Vulgar History Podcast. I have a website at annefosterwriter.com. And I'm also on Twitter at Anne Foster Writer. I'm on patreon.com/Anne Foster Writer. And if you enjoy this episode of Vulgar History, like all the podcast hosts always say, subscribe, rate, and review on your favorite podcast app. And I can't wait to tell you another story next time. And take care, everybody. So no revisiting of the story of Caroline of Brunswick. I would never possibly do it without inviting Lana Wood Johnson to come and join me. Lana, can you share your thoughts about Caroline of Brunswick?
I'm here for justice. Caroline of Brunswick is my new favorite, and it's because of Anne that she's my favorite. Everything I know about her, I know from Anne, and the wild ride we had one day when we discovered her existence. We're still uncovering every single thing it meant, but I'm here for her and what she deserves.
Yeah, let's recap for everybody. So I don't even know what this was, like 5 years ago or something. I saw a call for submissions. Somebody was putting together a book that was like one chapter about each of the royal monarchs or royal consorts of Great Britain. And they were like, hey, this was their second call. They're like, hey, we got a lot of people applying for this and this and this. But, here's the ones that nobody's submitted about yet. And I was like, haha. And that's my usual strategy when submitting to things. I'm like, well, if I'm the only one submitting on this topic, then chances are better they're going to choose me instead of someone else. I mean, spoiler, they didn't choose me. But they gave a list of I forgot 5 or 6 people who nobody had submitted about yet. So I was like, well, who are all these people? And I just looked them up on Wikipedia. And one of them is Caroline of Brunswick. And her Wikipedia, I was just like, oh my God. And I think I started sending you screen captures. I was just like, Lana, look at this story. And then I got a biography out of her. And I was reading it as an ebook. And I was sending you just screen captures of I'm like, Lana, she pretended to have a baby when she was a teenager.
To get out of a party.
Yeah. Yeah. It was
so
the opposite.
Relatable.
It was she was mad because her parents wouldn't let her go to a dance. So I think she was trying to make them not go or something like that. It was just chaos. It was a weird plan. She had never in her life, she had been raised in this Rapunzel sort of way. She wasn't allowed to see any men or do anything fun ever. So clearly she wasn't actually pregnant. That was pretty. Anyway, but then from then on, for the rest of her life, there were these rumors that like she had a secret baby, and maybe she did. And then there was
Or
the baby
several.
collection. I think that's yes. Tell us your thoughts about her baby collection that she amassed.
That's the thing about it, is I could go either way equally. Like, they're either all her kids, or she was literally just collecting babies to make her husband pay for them. Like, I'm equally happy with both outcomes of her just collecting orphans to make it more expensive for George, which, like, good on her. Do that. Make him pay
Yeah.
for all of the people, the whole of England. Like, that works for me. But like, yeah, secret kids, sure, she could do that too. I'm happy that it goes either way, because I spent so much of my life learning about the Regency and no one told me a thing about this woman, and I resent that.
Yeah.
I just resent it.
It's what well no, it's well. So I've been recently, for undisclosed reasons, reading some more biographies of her, and just I'm sending you more facts as I learn them, because it's no one appreciates them as much as you do.
It gets better.
It's so weird. Like, yeah, what you just said about, like, the Regency era, it's like such a well-known time period. And I'm reading these things and it's like all these people who one knows about from this era. And it's like like I said in the podcast, Jane Austen said this about her and Lord Byron said this about her, but they said other things about her too. She was the most famous woman in England for a really long time because of like the court cases, right? And then she kept writing letters to the editor defending herself that just made everything worse. Like, she was so explosively famous, but I have not read a lot of Regency era things, but at this point of my Carolina Brunswick research, I would know if she showed up in any book, because I've been trying to find any mention of her anywhere.
She's kind of like, as I've said before, Real Housewives of Regency England. But she's also a little bit Margaret Mitchell, like the whistleblower. One of the whistleblowers for the Watergate case was the wife of the chief of staff for Nixon. That chief of staff that then became, not going into that, that's too nerdy, but she was like a little bit unhinged, and she would tell reporters anything, and they loved her for it. And like, it gives both of those vibes at the same time. I love her. I just love her.
I love her, and like there's so many. What I hope to do one day is to. I mean, I'll just say, like, I want to write a book about her, and if anyone out there listening is an editor, you should buy it, because I want to be able to go into these archives and find the letters that she sent. None of the biographies really go as deep into the messiness as I would. Editors, by my proposal, but I want to read more of these messy ass letters, because they're like her husband, Prinny, like he has an archive of like all of his letters. So we see him being a bitch about it. We see his mom, our least fave, Queen Charlotte, what she wrote about it. But there's so many letters, and they exist, and I want to read them, because she was like, I don't know, I'm trying to think about who else is someone to it's a real energy of someone who would go to Instagram and just be posting videos and or notes, callbacks to every comment that anyone ever said to them.
It's Real Housewives.
Yeah, no, exactly. But it's the Regency era version of that, where she would just like, if anything like wrong that was done to her, whether she felt like it was a wrong, whether it was a wrong, like she would just be like, how dare you? And she'd write a letter to the editor. She'd write a letter to the person. She would keep writing letters. She would show up.
She'd air it for everybody.
I love the messiness. Like this was the reason she was the first episode of Vulgar History ever, I think, because she was, for both of us, she was such a discovery of a person that we didn't know about, who is existing in a time period that is so well known. And she's such a messy, like I record that it was the first episode. So like tits out energy was not a phrase, but like she epitomizes it. She's just like,
she does.
Unstoppable. Like it's amazing.
And I think that hits both of our sweet spots of, I really love it when we see the authenticity of people in the past. Like so much of it is watered down, like Mary Queen of Scots gets watered down into this bland person that is just the mother of a king. And like so many people just become nothing in the course of history. And you are all about like the messy bitches of history. And so she is our overlap of this is the reality of a situation that everybody tries to make look like this nice, perfect, lovely time. And she's married to this horrible human being, like just absolute useless waste of space.
Yeah, I mean, just picturing, I don't know, Bridgerton or whatever, and she just like bursts open the doors of some dinner party to be like, hey, bitches, I'm here. You know, like she could show up in any of those things. And I love picturing her or like, you know what, like any Pride and Prejudice movie where everyone's like, I mean, Jane Austen is a very sort of the way that people act in Jane Austen book, but if Caroline of Brunswick just showed up to be like, fuck everybody, like I just love the thought of her, like we think of what the Regency era is like, and that is not what it was like. That is what we retroactively imagine it was. Like people who do, and no shade at all, but you know, Regency reenactors who like throw the balls and like to cosplay as being that era. I love it. I think it's great. And this was also happening.
It was not this idyllic time period. Like it was as messy as a Shonda Rhimes. And that's what I love about her is like you can only erase her from history because you cannot make her tolerable.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. And we're not going to get into all of this, but like a lot of it is Queen Victoria came along afterwards, and she in her time was responsible for a lot of the watering down, the sanitizing of a lot of past, because she was just like the royal family is like, this is the narrative I want everyone to think about us, the British royal family. Lana's face. But right, because
so much.
Caroline came she really set the tone for what a lot of people think even now about the British royal family. And we're not going to dive into that, but
about everything. She made everything seem like it was so much nicer and sweeter and good and perfect. And like, we're talking about literal colonizers. Like,
yeah. Yeah.
No.
Okay, speaking of, one of the reasons why I presume she did that is that everybody hated Caroline's husband. Like there was riots,
for good reason.
There was people like he sucked. Like he did. I don't think there's many people who would argue that he was a good person or a good king. But he was a shitty person. And this is where Caroline got some of her power from, was because, and it's very, very Charles and Diana adjacent, where Diana had her chaotic moments, but she was, I wouldn't say messy bitch was her main personality trait. Mm-mm. She could bring that out when it was needed, but she was like a gracious, kind person who like did good stuff too. Caroline was only a messy bitch. But the people of England, in a similar way, like they hated their husbands so much that they just rallied behind this person. Like the political cartoons I've seen when I've been reading about her now is they're all making fun of her husband. And like inherently, like if you're going to hate her husband, then you need to like her because she's the antithesis of the husband. She also hates the husband. So she is this messy bitch, but everyone is rallying behind her. And that's so fascinating to see, because in another context, you would see the cartoons would be making fun of her. But instead, they're making fun of her husband and using her as their sword. Like she is their champion. And she's just like, heh. Like, and she loves it. She loves that she gets this attention. She loves that people are behind her.
In the post-Victorian era, they would have been like, they're both terrible people. They're ruining the monarchy. Everything is awful about this. They would have pulled a full Harry and Meghan on them. But pre-Victoria, who had this false sense of society and propriety that she didn't embody really. Before that, people could be messy and we would like them. And so we're finally freeing ourselves from her.
Well, like I just love every moment. It's funny. I've been rereading. By the time this episode comes out, people will know why. Anyway, I've been rereading a couple different things. You know, when I've been rereading the Fredegund book and stuff, I'm just like, yeah, like reading these moments. I'm like, oh, that is so iconic. That's so great. So reading about Caroline, like there's moments where she goes to the opera and everyone stands up and cheers for her. Like these moments, like, and that's in England that you don't hear about in like Regency era stuff. Like they were ready to riot at the drop of a hat. Like they were just like Like, they loved her. They hated the king.
They were very, very close to pulling a full French Revolution. And it was touch and go there for a while.
And that's the thing. This is like...
It's the same era. It's the same...
It's the exact same era. Yeah. Like, Queen Charlotte and Marie Antoinette were besties, pen pals. And this is the era of, there was so many revolutions. Like, there was the Haiti Revolution. Like, this is like, revolution was in the air. So England was like on the precipice and ready. And Carolina Brunswick was like, this energy gives me attention. And so I'm going to just like ride this wave and like stoke it a bit more because I'm a messy bitch. Like, and the crowds were just like, we love you. You're so messy. Like, I love that the people loved her. The whole thing about like her funeral, like, just to recap for an episode that everyone just heard me do. But like, when they did her funeral and they're all like, okay, people are going to riot. So we need to like reroute the parade. And people are like, how dare you reroute the parade? And then they had a riot anyway.
They were going to riot. You can't stop them.
A couple of people died. Yeah. Like, they just... And then her petty bitch, how she put on her tomb, like, the wronged queen and everything. It's just like, to the end, she's just like, fuck you, the British royal family. Fuck you, the British royal family. I don't think this was in the episode because it's something I just read in my recent rereading, but she had memoirs that she would carry around with her in like a trunk. And she like had a guard who would like guard the trunk. She's like, no one can get in that trunk that contains my memoirs. And everybody knew this. Like, she was... I don't know if it did contain her memoirs. It
could also contain alcohol.
It could also contain, I don't know, like some cute outfits. Like, but she... a couple Sebring babies. But yeah, like, people knew that she had this trunk that she took with her that had allegedly her memoirs. And like, people made cartoons about that. Like, people wrote about that in the newspapers, like, oh, if she ever publishes these memoirs. I wish she published those memoirs. And that's an argument in favor of like, there wasn't actually memoirs. And I think that would be her to date. She would be out there like the Housewives. Like, she would have her like my side of the story, like, would be published. The energy, it's interesting. It's a bit Fergie. Fergie is very firmly back in the fold of like the contemporary British royal family. But for a while, Fergie was out there. She was like a Weight Watchers spokesperson. She was like having her toes sucked on a yacht. Like, that's the energy of Carolina Brunswick. I think that comparison, at least a little bit, reminds me of her. So, Lana, you call her the greatest of all time. And why do you say that?
Just because of the sheer level of chaos that she brings to an era that tries very, very hard to be portrayed as the least chaotic era. A lot of the reason they were trying to portray themselves as the least chaotic was so that people didn't revolt, so that they didn't end up like the French Revolution. Like, Napoleon was a genuine threat during this entire era. Like, Jane Austen uses it in her stories, but she does so because that was the reality of the situation, was Napoleon could come at any time and take over the island. And so like, there was a lot that could potentially have been chaotic, and the propaganda machine was so strong that even to this day it still maintains. But she kind of gives lie to that situation of everybody's happy and we were so civilized. Like, they were not civilized. They were not happy. They were not united. They did not agree on things. And she is like the embodiment of the absolute chaos that once you dig underneath, once you get just past that surface of everything's great and civilized, you can see that again, she probably had a party in that trunk. Like, who knows? I would not have been surprised if she had anachronistic, like, you open it up and it has a full stereo and a full bar, and like just was ready to have a beachside party, like whenever, wherever. Like, that's the energy she brings to every situation.
There's something about when she left England the first time, when she was just kind of like over fighting with Prinny. And so she went off to Italy to just like be a messy bitch there and like take up with her married lover and, you know, enter all these countries like on camels and whatever. When she left, she was wearing this gargantuous hat. She wasn't leaving like like sneaking out, like ashamed, like she hadn't gotten what she wanted. She was just like, look at me, I'm leaving. And she's wearing some sort of, like 2-foot tall feather on her hat. And this, like, so people drew pictures of that because it was like very iconic as well. She's like, I guess me
like,
and this
"Peace out,
giant hat are
bitches."
we're just gonna take my trunk of maybe memoirs. Like she's just like, everything was everything was a major scene. Like she was really like, today we see, it's funny, like you almost can take it for granted. Like today, like every celebrity is like calling the paparazzi on themselves and doing all this stuff. And like she brought that energy in a time where it's like people had to draw cartoons of you. Like there was not cameras.
Yes.
Like you couldn't be caught candidly. So like these things that she did that we know about, it's like it's as though she called basically the paparazzi, but it was like a bunch of people with sketchbooks. It was like she's like, people need to know what I'm doing. And if they're not there to know what I'm doing, then she's gonna like get word to be like, here's what I think and here's and if that didn't work, she would write a letter to the editor. She was just like, and this is like what I find so interesting.
Gonna get attention. This is mine.
She's gonna get attention. She was so famous at this time period. And she was just like dedicated to people knowing what she thought about everything. And that's what's wild about the way that it was stomped out, to the point that like you, like a person who knows this time period really well, like who knows about the King Georges and stuff, like you didn't know any of this stuff. Like she lived so large, and it's a bit Fredegund-esque to be like this woman who is like so sensational and everybody knows her name, but then like if it's stomped out, then you just like no one says the name and then it's forgotten about. Like when you start looking for stuff about her, there's so much stuff about her, but it's like no one cares anymore except for me. And this is what makes me happy. It's the first episode of Vulgar History, which is why it's the most listened to episode ever, because like the Tits Up Brigade are completionists. Like they begin at the beginning. So everyone who's listening to this podcast is like, let's start at the start.
It is our way.
Yeah, like year after year, it's like, what's the most listened to episode? It's always Caroline of Brunswick, because everybody starts there. So I'm just like, good. People, like those people now know.
They now know. But her score is a travesty.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say that. So I will, one of the reasons why I'm doing this, like, and for the next several weeks, like partially it's to give myself a bit of a hiatus, but partially it's because the first season I was just, I didn't know about tits out energy, all these things. Like
you didn't have anything to compare it to.
No, exactly. So I'm just like, I don't know. I'm just choosing a number. So I didn't know who to compare Caroline of Brunswick to. So I was just choosing numbers. I just invented the score. And so part of why we're here, you said at the very beginning, Lana, you're here for justice. And so am I. I just did on Instagram several weeks ago to you listeners, but I didn't ask me anything. And somebody said, what are some episodes? What are some scores or some people you'd like to revisit? And I said, Caroline of Brunswick, Frances Howard, and Cleopatra, because those are ones that in retrospect, based on all the people I've done since, I'm just like, these numbers are not correct. This is not where they should slot in. This is not who they should be in the neighborhood of. So we're going to bring justice for Caroline of Brunswick with a complete redo. And I mean, Lana, you are the website person. So like the original Caroline of Brunswick score is going to stay there, but it's going to be Caroline of Brunswick revisited, and that will be, to me, her real score. Like that'll be the one that I compare her to.
Because she does not deserve to be down near Mary Toft. Like that's just not okay.
No. I mean, listeners, she has a 20. That's like, even the people who I talk about with Alison, they all get like 23.
And me.
The people who have no significance. Yeah. It's kind of the Alison and Lana sort of like suburb of people who are really high in some things and then really low in like significance, I think. There's real high scandal, but really low everything else.
We can make them interesting. Alison and I have the capacity to make them interesting. But Caroline is interesting on her own.
Well, here's the thing. Right. So we're saying this. So like Empress Sisi has a 21, but that's correct. Like that's Empress Sisi. Yeah. Anyway,
no, that's,
like that's a recent score. That was a thoughtful, we did that. Yeah. Anyway, Queen Charlotte has 1, and that is also fair. But Caroline of Brunswick, let's elevate her out of the 20 and up into the neighborhood where she belongs based on everything you've just heard us talk about, everything from the original episode. So the first category is scandaliciousness. A 7. Lana, what are your thoughts?
30, 35. Like,
The
there's
highest we can
nothing.
go is 10.
She was scandalous as a teenager who didn't want, like, she didn't want to go to a party. So she made up a whole scandal.
Yeah.
Like, how is she anything less than a 10?
Well, and everything we just said, like the letters to the editor, the baby collection, the fact that like George was like, yeah, I'm going to try to divorce her. And she was like, fuck you. I'm going to write a letter to the editor. I'm going to air all of your dirty business. I'm going to share the letters your mother wrote to me. Like, and then when she finally left, she's like, I'm going to take up with this married man. Like the two trials, the two adultery trials, the first one, which is just like, are these her babies? And then the second trial being like, did she sleep with this Italian man? Like, it's a 10.
Didn't she bring him back to England with her to contest the fact that he was trying to divorce her? She brings back her married lover with her.
Yeah. And then the whole trial, like people, like they just brought all these people from Italy, and then like Prinny had sent all these sort of like spies or people, like everyone who she interacted with in Italy was like, oh yeah, no, that's totally her lover. But when they went on trial, like they're all being paid off because the political, oh my God, the Tories and the Whigs, I don't give a shit. But like that was all part of this. And so the people who didn't like the king, the political party, they were all supporting Caroline. So like I think they were paying off some of the witnesses to be like, no, I never saw her fuck that Italian guy. Like it was like, imagine like court TV, like this case, like it's the drama of it. And the fact that the case with the, are these her babies or not? That case, the delicate investigation, it ended with a dramatic Perry Mason-esque reveal of the mother of the babies arrived, and she's like, I'm the mother of the babies. Like, you can't make that up.
It was everything for drama. She did everything for drama, and when it wasn't, she made it drama. Like, I just don't even know how you could score her anything less than a 10. I just don't.
And even like, this is just like a kind of Brunswick love fest, but the whole coronation situation, her showing up, her just crashing the coronation that she had been specifically not invited to when she couldn't get in the door, running to the other door, like in front of thousands of people. Like this bitch, like she lived for drama. And there's nothing she did in her life that was not entirely for scandal reasons. And that's why I love her. Yeah, so 10, if we could go higher than 10, I could. Like, I would, but 10. That's where she sits. Next is scheminess. I gave her a 5 originally.
I may not be mad at that.
So here's the thing with her scheminess. Like, she always had a scheme, but they're all kind of half-hearted and random and not good.
Like, almost all of her schemes are, I hate my husband and I'm going to make his life miserable. Or I hate my parents and I'm going to make their lives miserable. It wasn't really like...
They're not well executed plans. Like scheminess, for some people, I rephrase it, especially when I'm explaining to a guest specialist, but it's sort of like, it has to do with like cleverness, like intelligence, like the ability to see a situation and maneuver your way around it.
Yeah.
And she just was a bull in a china shop energy. Like she wasn't scheming. She had what one could call schemes, but they were more just kind of like messy, random, chaotic, sort of just like, it feels very like not well thought out.
They had the effect of well thought out schemes, but she just like, she had so many of them that most like 99% of them failed. And the 1% that did were just amazing. But it wasn't scheminess. It wasn't, and you know me, I love scheminess. It's my favorite thing. But this is like, I'm not mad at a 5. Like she aspired to scheminess is about as close as we can get.
It reminds me of, not that I know the chess world at all, but you know, it's kind of like people who play chess, like they all memorize the moves and stuff and they play against each other and they all have the same knowledge. And once in a while, some random chaotic person comes in who doesn't really know the rules of chess, and the things they do is so startling to a chess master, you know, that sometimes the effect of that can be that that person does well. But it's not because that person is good at chess. It's just because that person is so much not playing by the rules that the other person just does. Yeah. So just in the interest of like reparations, I'm going to say 6. I'm going to give her, just for the sheer volume of schemes. Like, they were not good schemes, but there was so many of them that just inherently, I'm going to give her a 6. Significance, I gave her a 3.
Oof. Significance is where she falls down as well. Like, she's significant to me. She deserves to be significant.
No, well, that's the thing. Everyone on the show is significant to us. But here's what I was thinking. I've been thinking about this a lot. So her significance, Lana, like, you know, like she was quite easily erased from history and from memory. But her significance is that she was just like, my husband sucks and I'm going to leave him. If she had been a different kind of person and stuck around and had more children, we wouldn't have had Queen Victoria.
Oh, yeah.
Like the fact that she left Prinny led to the entire situation that led to Queen Victoria, who herself is significant. So if Caroline, like, she fucked Prinny once and then was like, never again.
He was on board with that. Like, he wasn't trying to fulfill his duty with her either.
No, for sure. But like, if Queen Charlotte had been married to Prinny, she would just be like, well, my husband sucks. But anyway, it's my duty to have 17 children with him. So I'm not saying that this is a 10. I'm just saying, like, the significance of Caroline of Brunswick is that her terrible marriage to Prinny, of which she was 50% of that terrible marriage, led to the Queen Victoria. So
yeah, that's absolute facts. And Charlotte dying, that sucked.
Her daughter, yeah. Well, that's the thing. So if, oh God, everything I've been reading as well, her daughter, Charlotte, I love.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to be clear, not Queen Charlotte, the boring woman from Bridgerton, but the actual boring woman who then Bridgerton made not boring. So Caroline of Brunswick and Prinny had their daughter, Princess Charlotte, who was copy-paste Caroline of Brunswick in the best ways. She was a messy bitch in her genes. You know, if you do like nature versus nurture, like they kept her away from Caroline as much as possible, and that just made her become even more like Caroline. She was great. There was one part of the story I was reading where there was some sort of important meeting, or it might have been when her father was officially named the regent, and it was in like some room. Princess Charlotte was like outside. They're like, Charlotte, you can't be involved. And she's like, Charlotte, no. Charlotte, yes. And she's like riding a horse back and forth outside, trying to peek in the windows. Like, she's just like no subtlety. Will not take no for an answer. Like they had arranged a marriage for her, and she was like, but I met someone else who I like better. Fuck you. And they had to, like, you know, the whole thing about, like, even with Caroline of Brunswick, like, they arranged this marriage. She and Prinny hated each other, but they're like, well, we've already done the planning. You have to get married. Princess Charlotte, they had done the planning, and she's like, I'm going to say no. And then they had to undo all the plan. Like, she was such a strong-willed person. She would have been a really cool queen.
She would have been amazing.
Like, the effect would have been, what if Caroline of Brunswick, she ran away from home that time? Like, she took a taxi.
She's the anti-Victoria. And I'm so mad that she died in childbirth. This is why people just need to wash their freaking hands. Wash your hands.
It's so sad. Yeah. Wash your hands, doctors, between touching corpses and putting your hands up inside of people having babies. But, right. So there's like a lot of situations that led to Victoria becoming queen. But one of them was the fact that Caroline of Brunswick had one child. So anyway, what I'm saying is she's more than a 3.
Okay. I trust you.
At least in that way. And then in ways that I can't define because I don't know enough about all of this. But I think that her involvement in politics and stuff like that helped weigh things in one direction or the other. Like when different factions would sort of lean on her. The development of the tabloid press, I think that she really led to that. Anyway, it's so tricky when there's somebody who is so significant in their era, but then isn't anymore. And we usually judge based on how in their significance, not just within the time they lived, but later on.
And she lived in a very tumultuous time, as I have already said. So, like, her encouraging editors to be chaotic and treat the royal family the way they did, that may have contributed to Victoria. That may have contributed to the perception of the royal family we have today. Like, I wouldn't even be surprised because it's only been 200 years. And the relationship that they have with the media and the relation, like calling the media and planting stories Does that sound familiar? And she was the first one to do that?
She invented that. Yeah. You know what? That's interesting because part of what I've been reading as well was about like the media. And this is something you know more about than I do, like the tabloid journalism being invented and stuff. But like they hated George the Third. Is that the Hamilton one?
Yes. George III is the
Yeah.
Bridgerton guy.
Sorry.
Yes. The farmer. They
Side
hated
note,
the farmer king.
the farmer George. Yeah, no, sorry, just side note, I want to say I have an off-on relationship with being on TikTok. And one of the ones I posted, I was talking about Caroline Brunswick and I mentioned I mentioned King George and I was like, you know, the guy from Hamilton. And some dude was like, how dare you define George III as the guy from Hamilton when he did this or this or this or this. And I'm just like, I'm just going to uninstall this app right now because this is not energy I need in my life. But also, frankly, to the people listening to this, you mostly know him if you know him from Hamilton, and now you know him from like Bridgerton presents Queen Charlotte as Farmer George. No one's like, anyway. So the America guy.
He didn't do things. He did not do things. He did not care about you. He did not care about us. He was not a governor. He was a dude who just wanted to be left alone.
It's a big Tiberius from ancient Rome energy.
Yes.
Anyway, so people hated him because he lost the American colonies and because all the revolutions were happening and stuff. So like they were primed to hate the royal family already. And then his son was piece of shit, stupidest nickname, Prinny, who came along and was just of what we know about Farmer George and Charlotte, the queen, like they were just nerds, like having zebras and like growing plants or whatever and being frugal and stuff. And then Prinny was just like this like shopaholic asshole in debt guy. So there's every reason for the people of England to hate all of these people. And then Charlotte came along and she was like, I'm going to escalate this. I'm going to start like telling you inside stories about what, yeah, exactly. She kind of invented the leaking to the press and to the fact that the royal family then they had to start leaking to the press to counteract what she was doing. Like she kind of oversaw that.
She created a culture.
Yeah. For good or for bad.
I didn't think about this. Did not think about
that was her. Yeah. So what do you think about a 5 for significance?
I think with this new information, yes, I'd give her a 5. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was at a 1 and then I talked myself into a 5.
Well, I think because like the 5, everything we just talked about equals a 5. And then the way that she was so easily erased from history is the other missing 5, basically.
Yes.
Like her effects. Yeah. So that's the significance. And then okay. And then the sexism bonus. How much did sexism get in her way? And I'm interested in what you think because I think it might be a Cece/Lola Montez scenario where sexism kind of didn't get in her way.
Well,
because she's able to use it to her advantage.
She was a princess,
Mm-hmm.
a German, like of a German state, and she would have stayed home. Was she the oldest? She was. Am I remembering correct that she was the oldest?
She must have been. Yeah. Otherwise, they would have given someone else as the. Yeah.
We're talking like just before Ludwig, but that same Ludwig II or Mad King Ludwig kind of situation of somebody running a comparable country. If she'd been male, she would have been the prince. She would have just been being absolute chaos at the Habsburgs, which I appreciate. I always appreciate anybody being chaos at the Habsburgs.
No, like either of the Ludwigs, I think she would have brought that energy where she's just like, you know what we're going to do? Build fairy tale castles. Or like, you know what we're going to do? Like, I think she would have, had she been able to just vibe out there, I think she would have done her chaotic stuff within the confines of that. You're right. Yeah.
She would have been capable of accomplishing things if we hadn't only given power and leadership to males. She would have been far better at everything than Prinny. Like,
well, and we see that with her, like mini-me Princess Charlotte, who would, I think, have been a cool and interesting monarch. But you know what? And that's the thing. You're right. Like she was married, she's thrown into this marriage she did not want, treated horribly by, this is a bit Meghan Markle adjacent, but they're all like, oh my God, why would she leave the royal family when we all constantly treated her like shit the whole time from minute one? It's like,
shove this person that loves people and loves doing things and having parties and having a good time, and like shove her in the country and just leave her there. Like
you're right. Like it all traces back to like all of her behavior. Like it's a lot of, and this is giving me, because I read her biography recently, but Britney Spears' memoir. It's just like the lashing out. Like Britney Spears' memoir to me, I loved it, and it's just a catharsis. It's just like, this is the shit that was done to me, and fuck you, but also I'm gonna rise above. Like Caroline of Brunswick was stuck in this house. Like they wanted her to just go away. And she's just like, I will not. Like you put me in this situation. Fuck all of you. Everyone is going to know you're all pieces of shit. Yeah. And so like there's a lot of things going on there. But like part of that is just the inherent sexism of like, let's just marry off this person. She has no choice in the matter. The marriage is terrible. She like,
if she's not going to have
she
kids,
found
throw
a
her
way
on a farm.
Yeah. Yeah. And then she was such a chaotic mess in the farm that they were just like, would you please leave the continent? And she's like, thought you'd never ask. Thought you'd never ask. I'm just going to go on a fuck cruise with my married lover and his wife.
An American.
So yeah, everything does trace back to the fact that she's put in this shitty marriage. Yeah. And then like the power that she found, like the independence she's able to, like was on top of that. And then, yeah. Well, and then it's funny too, because like Prinny kept trying to divorce her so he could marry someone else and have heirs. And she's just like, fuck you. You stuck with me. So that's like, that was some of her, that was the power she had. So that was her turning this sexism around. But yeah, so I don't know, like, are you happy with the general 5?
Yeah.
A 5 for sexism?
Like, that's what I was going to say, is another 5 would be good there.
Yeah. So where this lands her, she's elevated from a 20 to a 26. And I'm just going to regale you. That's the score so many people get. I'm going to give you some of their names. Marie de Guise, 26.
I love her. Love her.
Let's see. Margaret of Anjou, 26.
You love her.
Ethelfled, 26. Like this is the neighborhood where I think Caroline of Brunswick would have a real nice time.
Yes.
Like these are people who have,
That she doesn't belong up with the lofted heights of like Catherine de Medici, who lived her entire life at the edge.
Yeah, no, and she's not like up with like Njinga, like she's not up there, but I think she is. This is a neighborhood of people who like did stuff. People who like
chaos.
Challenged the patriarchy of their time. Yeah, these are people who like did stuff. No, I think it's a great neighborhood to be within. I'm just looking for some of the like again, like the Lana people are not often. Like 27, there's a lot of great people in 27.
Yep. I have some instincts for a good vulgar history person, but like my personal taste is very more middle of the road than yours is, except for Kathy,
no, exactly,
who is special and different.
Yeah, but like people you've suggested, like Sushi from China, like she's a 35.
Yeah,
like Catherine de Medici, 35.5. Like that's like extreme levels of all 4 things, and it's hard to get a really high score in significance when you're not a ruling monarch, basically. But 26 is just like, that's where the girlies are. That's a cool crowd. That's where she is. She's now above Cece. Yeah, Cece had a 23. Like she's above there because she was such a messy bitch. Anyway, I'm really happy to have her re-implemented into this scale where she should be. Caroline of Brunswick. No longer at the bottom.
Correct. She does not belong near Mary Toft. Like, all love to Mary Toft and her rabbit babies.
Yeah.
She does not belong there. That is not her place.
No. Mary Toft, like in terms of just like people who were dealt a shitty hand and couldn't get out of it, that's Mary Toft. Like she,
correct.
I think was just like, can I just be a farmer's wife and like live on this farm and like do manual labor. Not that that's what she wanted, but that would be preferable to what happened to her.
She'd have taken that.
The people around her were scheming, and then she got thrust into a situation. Caroline was the one implementing things, making things happen. Like nothing other than the marriage, nothing happened to her. Like Caroline did things, and that's where she goes higher up on the scale.
Can we give a bestie award
A bestie award
to Princess Charlotte?
She had her mom's back. It's true. Princess Charlotte.
I think she deserves. I think that whole situation deserves that.
She was Princess Charlotte, like again, it's what I've been reading lately. Like she was really indoctrinated. Like she was raised to be like, your mother is a piece of shit. Never be like her. She's awful. And Charlotte is like, or is she great? And should I be exactly like her to the point that I'm going to run away to hang out with her more? Agree. Like it's not jeweled tortoise territory, but it's definitely the Lady Jane Seymour Memorial Award territory.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. There's been recently so many Elizabeths. I'm making sure I have my Elizabeths right. Yeah. Cece is 21 points. Elizabeth of Russia is 23 points. That's the other. I was like, who is who? But yeah. And Caroline of Brunswick above them both, 26. Hanging out with Marie de Guise, drinking wine, talking shit about John Knox, having a good time.
Hating the English altogether.
Thank you so much, Lana. This, like, when I decided I was going to be revisiting these episodes, I was just like, I can't not get your input on Caroline of Brunswick because, yeah, she's so important to us both, and she's important to this podcast, and I had to bring her justice.
She deserved it. She deserved better. Thank you for letting me bring my opinions to our favorite.
She's somebody who I would love in future when I'm, a wealthy retiree, if that happens. I'd like to retrace her steps. I'd like to go on the same Mediterranean cruise she did. And then end things in Bavaria or whatever and go visit her tomb. That I like her final bit of trolling where she like got the thing to say like the wronged queen or whatever. And then they changed it. But like for a minute, her tomb did say basically #justice for C of B until they change it. She's somebody who I would like to pay respects at her final resting place, just to be like, you were a real one. Thank you for revealing that the Regency era was not just like people doing dinner parties and dancing very politely while making smoldery eyes at each other.
And I want you to achieve the original goal of this podcast, which is to write a book about Caroline of Brunswick. Build a platform that allows you to write a book about Caroline of Brunswick.
That was, in fact, listeners, the whole point of this podcast. And I have a proposal. Editors, get in touch. I'm ready. I'm ready for this book.
She is important and necessary.
I mean, actually, sorry, Lana, can we just talk briefly? I didn't watch Queen Charlotte, A Bridgerton Story, but you told me about the complete erasure of Caroline of Brunswick from that show.
Complete. And for people that do watch that show, when Charlotte was saying thoughts and prayers at the funeral, that was Princess Charlotte's funeral. It was the whole thoughts and prayers is, oh no, sorrows, prayers, sorrows. That is Princess Charlotte. And there was no Caroline of Brunswick. And pretty,
as far as the show is concerned,
sad and pitiful. He was actually sad. He was actually sad she died. And I was like, no, that's not how any of this works.
Sounds fake. But as far as that show is concerned, Princess Charlotte emerged fully formed from Prinny's forehead or something. Like they don't. Obviously. And I get it. If you want to mention like, where's her mother? Oh, she's currently having a fuck cruise in Italy with a married guy. Like, I know you don't want to throw that into Queen Charlotte because then you're like, wait, why is our show about Queen Charlotte? And why is our show not about the person on the fuck cruise? But
correct.
But no, Lana, you were messaging me. You're like, I'm watching Bridgerton. And I'm like, oh my God, is Caroline there? And you're like, no. I'm like, well, then
It
how do
made
they
me-
explain who this dead princess is? And you're like, they don't.
I think I was most sad about the very fact that, like, I wanted to see what Chandra Rhimes did with Carolina Brunswick, because, like, that seems like one of her characters. It seems like someone she would
Yeah.
have loved to
Yeah.
play
Like
with.
she
and have a
produced
good
that
time.
Anna Delvey series. Like, I think you could do a
Right?
similar thing, but historical Carolina, like Bridgerton presents Carolina Brunswick. Like the love story could be her and the Italian married man. I don't know. Or invent a new person or something. But anyway, but again,
Yeah.
like so much stuff, like the foundations, I keep being reminded of this. And this is something else. There's so much you told me, Lana, and I just keep being like, 2 years later, I'm like, oh, that's what Lana meant when she told me that thing that time. But like the way that Queen Victoria put a stranglehold on what British history is and how people understand it. Like she created these narratives that people kept retelling, and then new people retell. And then stuff like the Bridgerton books are like, oh, the Regency era. And then the Shondaland show is like based on those books. So it's like there's this myth like invented by Victoria, basically. And not just about this, also about Mary Queen of Scots and lots of things. Where like it's like the interview I did a bit ago with John Guy and Julia Fox about their new Anne Boleyn book. They were like, we're going to go to the original, the letters, the diaries. Like we don't want to look at anyone else's book about Anne Boleyn because we want to make our own opinions and find these things. And it's like, yeah, so much of British history, especially, is people looking back at these like 19th century writings and then just reinterpreting those instead of seeing like, well, wait, what actually happened in the actual era? And that's all Victoria's fault. Anyway, I'm just saying Bridgerton is, you know, like a fantasy and whatever, and like removed in a bunch of ways, but it still hews to the same original core understanding of the Regency era, which was invented by Victoria.
Entirely whole stock.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I hate her. As much as I love Carolina Brunswick, I hate Victoria.
One day, and we've said this before on the podcast, and I will just remind everybody, at some point, I'm going to have Lana on to do, on the Patreon, to do So This Asshole Victoria, who's going to be our first lady asshole. And I'm just going to, I'm just, the way that Alison just unleashed on the great on our Patreon, I'm just going to let you just go. I'm going to just like set up my microphone, put myself on mute, and just let you go.
No, you have to ask me questions. You have to prompt me. For each of my rants, I need a little small prompt because I forget things because she did so much to hate.
Okay, no, I will be there with the prompts for sure. But that is to come in future, listeners. Please just know. It's sort of been a long-standing thing. Like Lana hates Queen Victoria, and one day you will. I will. When we're both ready, yeah, we will record that.
Victoria is my Napoleon.
That's Victoria is your Henry VIII to me. Yeah.
Yes. You have Henry VIII, Alison has Napoleon, and I have Victoria.
Mm-hmm. And that's like, that explains to everybody exactly the extent and the depth into your soul of the hatred. Yeah. Well, thank you for helping me bring justice to Carolina Brunswick.
Thank you for having me.
She deserves this 26, and she also deserved much more in life. But you know, we celebrate her now. We elevate her name. She is the reason for this podcast. Carolina Brunswick. So I'm so happy we did that. I'm so happy we got to revisit the story of Carolina Brunswick. And I'm being super serious when I say, if you're an editor for a publishing company, reach out to me because I have a book proposal about this person. And I think all the Tits Out Brigade would buy copies and it would be a bestseller. Anyway, so just a couple reminders about various vulgar history things. You can get in touch with me using the form at vulgarhistory.com or emailing me at vulgarhistorypod@gmail.com with suggestions or feedback or thoughts or opinions. But especially, I like all those things. And for the people who send me in suggestions or requests of people to talk about on the show, I save those all. I take this all really seriously. I've got such a long list of like people I hope to talk about one day. And some of the most exciting episodes have been from suggestions from people just like you. So I always love to hear from you, the listeners. I'm also on Instagram at Vulgar History Pod. And we have, I know it's getting close to like Christmas, but if you need some last minute gifts that are ridiculous, merch, or if you're listening to this later and you just like some merch. All our merch is available at vulgarhistory.com/store. Or if you're outside of the US, the shipping is a bit better if you go to vulgarhistory.redbubble.com. And also, just speaking of gifts and things, I'll put the link here, but also there's a highlight in my Instagram of the Vulgar History gift guide, which are not just a bunch of books that I recommend, but also some other items from small businesses that I think would be great for the Vulgar History listener on your list, including, if you need a last minute gift, a cameo. Get a little video from me is the thing you could do. I'm just doing it over Christmas, but if you want to do that, you can. Anyway, you can also support the podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter, where for $1 a month, you get early ad-free access to all episodes. For $5 or more a month, you get the early ad-free access, as well as access to bonus episodes of Vulgar Peace Theater, where I talk about costume dramas with Alison Epstein and Lana Wood Johnson. Coming up is going to be the recording of our Christmas special of Vulgar Peace Theater. We're talking about A Lion in Winter, the Eleanor of Aquitaine movie with Katharine Hepburn. Anyway, there's also other bonus episodes available to people at that $5 and more a month level. There's the episodes of So This Asshole, where I talk about horrible men from the podcasts. I just scream about how much I hate them. There's also some episodes of The After Show and other things. So anyway, you can also get transcripts of recent episodes of this podcast. If you go to vulgarhistory.com, just go to the episode you want the transcript for. It's like the newer ones have the transcripts, and then our partner with the wordery, Aveline Malik, is working backwards with the transcript. So anyway, those are available there for people who prefer, or just in addition to, like to read their podcasts. And anyway, thanks for listening to this special revisiting episode of Carolina Brunswick. And until next time, keep your pants on and your tits out. Vulgar History is hosted, written, and researched by Ann Foster and edited by Christina Lumagi.
Welcome to the small town of Chinook, where faith runs deep and secrets run deeper. In this new thriller, religion and crime collide when a gruesome murder rocks the isolated Montana community. Everyone is quick to point their fingers at a drug-addicted teenager, but local deputy Ruth Vogel isn't convinced. She suspects connections to a powerful religious group. Enter federal agent V.B. Laureau, who has been investigating a local church for possible criminal activity. The pair form an unlikely partnership to catch the killer, unearthing secrets that leave Ruth torn between her duty to the law, her religious convictions, and her very own family. But something more sinister than murder is afoot, and someone is watching Ruth.
Chinook, starring Kelly Marie Tran and Sanaa Lathan. Listen to Chinook wherever you get your podcasts.
Nowadays, trends and news cycles change faster than we can blink. But there are some things that withstand the test of time. And if you're looking for a connection to something timeless, and maybe also a glimpse of life at a slower pace, I believe everyone can relate to the very human experiences explored in Jane Austen's novels. And that's where I come in. My name is Alison Larkin. I'm a writer, comedian, and narrator and host of the Jane Austen podcast with Alison Larkin. I spent a lot of my childhood in the part of England where Jane Austen lived and wrote, and now that I live in the States, nothing gives me a sense of homecoming quite like narrating her books. On this show, you'll listen to award-winning narration. I'll give myself a pat on the back for that, as well as conversations with actors, writers, and other fascinating people who all share a passionate love for Jane Austen. So please, join me as we embark on a wonderful journey through Jane Austen's work. Be sure to listen and subscribe to the Jane Austen podcast with Alison Larkin, wherever you get your podcasts.